Hi everyone, welcome back to Data Cadence. My name is Rahul, and in this particular video, we are going to look at a SQL coding questions which was asked in Twitter in a data science interview. Twitter now known as X, but it's one and the same thing. So SQL coding is equally important for data science interviews. So we do a lot of theoretical videos and trying to explain concepts so that you have an in-depth understanding of whatever that you're using in a day-to-day workflow as a data scientist or something that might be expected out of you in an interview. But an equally important aspect is hands-on coding, and particularly people are still okay with Python coding, but I see a lot of even seasoned data scientists struggling to write easy SQL queries, and this will be required in a day-to-day job as well, because a lot of the times or almost every single time you will need to pull data from some sort of SQL data warehouse or any data warehouse that has a SQL like interface. So yes, it's important to be hands-on with SQL, and yes, a lot of the companies will expect you to have decent SQL coding skills when you're applying for data science roles. So without further ado, let's begin. Let's dive into the question and have a look at what is being asked in the question and then how we can basically tackle that one. So this is a question from Twitter, like I said. So in this question, you are given a table of tweet data over a specified time period, and you are asked to calculate a 3-day rolling average of tweets for each user. And in the output, you have to give the user ID, the tweet date, and the rolling averages rounded to 2 decimal places. And again, in the notes that they have given, they have basically explained what a rolling average or a moving average is. A lot of you might be aware, and for those of you who are not, you can simply read through this. I will also explain briefly what do they mean by a rolling average or a moving average. And in this case, they want to determine the tweet count for each user, and they basically want to see that in this given time series of tweets, how does it change over a 3-day period, right? So there is only one table, so you don't need to worry about joining multiple tables or anything. This is still labeled as a medium level problem, but still I would call it fairly easy if you know basic concepts in SQL, but let's approach the problem. So yes, in this tweets table, you do have the user ID, the tweet date, and the tweet count. And you can see one of the examples of the table. So for user ID 111, you have a series of tweets that tweet counts basically that he or she had made on a given date. And you can see that this particular date is changing, and along with that you have basically the tweet count. So user ID 111 on this particular date made 2 tweets, then on the next day say 1 tweet, and so on. And the way rolling average is defined is you basically consider the 3 rows, the last 3 rows in the time series, including the current row, and you basically calculate an average based on that. So if I were to give you an example, if you see this first row, so there is only this one row, so there's nothing to look back. So the moving average itself will start from 2, and that's what you can see. If you go to the second row, you see that there is 1 in this current row and 2 prior to that. So there's only one row, so you can consider 2 plus 1, that would be 3, and you divide that by 2, so the average comes out to be 1.5. For the third row, similarly, you can go 3 steps back, including this one. So 3 plus 1 plus 2 is 6, and divide 6 by 3, you end up with 2. Similarly, you see that 4 plus 3 plus 1, that is 8, and you divide 8 by 3 and then round it off to 2 decimal places, you end up with 2.67. So I hope you get the idea of what is expected, and in the output, you need to have the user ID column, the tweet date, and the rolling average of a 3-day period. So before I solve this particular problem and I talk about the solution, I think take out some time, try to think about how you would approach this. I would give you one hint. If you are aware of window functions in SQL, just try to utilize those, because it's important for you to develop the thought process. I will any which ways cover the entire thought process and how do I look at this particular problem and what thoughts come to my mind when I'm looking to solve this particular one. But it's important for you to develop that thinking, and you can see that you have been given this particular query, that is select star from tweets, and you end up with a similar table that we saw. So maybe before I talk about the solution, pause this particular video, take some time out and try to think about the solution. And now I will talk about the thought process and the solution, right? Alright, so let's break this down. So first, what is a rolling average? So briefly described, but I'll just mention it once again. A moving average or a rolling average is a statistical method that calculates the average of a dataset over a specified period, which is 3 days in this case, right? So what is the approach that comes to mind? So the first thing which comes to my mind at least is to sort the data by user ID and tweet date. And the second thing that we can do post that is to utilize the SQL window functions to calculate the rolling average. And then finally, once you are done with that, you can partition the data by user ID to ensure that user specific calculations are done, and then you can order it by the tweet date. So looks fairly straightforward. What I will do is I will create a CTE or a common table expression for each of these step by step. So I think the first one that we need to develop is, say, the ordered tweets. So I would just start coding it here now. So we are developing a CTE, in case you are not aware. So a CTE is just a common table expression, that is, think of it like an intermediate view of your particular solution. So I am naming it as ordered tweets, and here I will simply select all the fields from the tweets table. So say user ID, tweet date, and the tweet count. And now what you can do is you can utilize the row number function that you have in SQL. And of course, there is a difference between, say, row number, rank, and dense rank. That is another important interview question. I hope if you're looking at this, you are aware about the difference. If not, just go back, study what the difference is, and then come back, so that you are clear that why I am writing the row number and what is the particular syntax, right? So you can use the row number function like I mentioned, and of course you can partition by the user ID, and then you have to sort it by the tweet dates like I said. So you can partition by user ID and order by the tweet date. And for this particular row number, you can give an alias as, say, row underscore num, and all this you would select from the tweets table. So this is the first CT, fairly straightforward. You are just calculating a row number after sorting by the user ID and the tweet date. Now the second CT is where we will calculate the rolling average using another window function. So let me label that particular CT as, say, rolling underscore average. And for this particular CT, what we are going to do is, again, we will be selecting the user ID, the tweet date, and the tweet count. Tweet date and the tweet count. And now what you can do is, instead of row number here, this time we will use average, because of course we want to calculate the rolling average. And you need to use an over clause here, because you need to do this over a window. And here also you can partition by user ID, because you need to do this for each user, and you can order by the tweet date. And now is where the moving average, the moving part or the moving window part sort of comes in. Here you can use something known as a keyword, which is known as, so we will write it like this. First I'll write it and then I'll explain it. Rows between two, preceding, and the current row. So if you're aware about all these keywords, so essentially what we are trying to mention here is that you take in the current row and you take two rows prior to that, and then you compute a average over each user, right? And you have to order it by the tweet date. Of course, you need to sort it by the tweet dates first. But this particular thing is where we are mentioning that we are having a window of size 3, that is the current row, and 2 rows prior to that. And here is where the average part is coming in, right? So therefore we have a moving average, and that's all you have to do. And you can assign it an alias, maybe rolling average 3D. And all of this will come up from the above CTE that you had created. That is basically your ordered tweets. Now, once you have these two CTEs in place, all you need to do is write a final query or do a final selection. And that final selection is simply a select query that you need to do over the second CTE that you have developed. So in the output, remember, we need the user ID, we need the tweet date, that is something we need, and we need to round off this particular rolling average 3 days that we have calculated to, say, 2 decimal values. That's what is mentioned in the problem. And we need to alias it as rolling average 3D itself. So we will use that particular alias to basically have it like that. And then all this you need to do from the second CTE that you created above, that is, say, rolling average. And finally, you need to sort out your data by the user ID and the tweet date. And I think that this should solve for the problem that we have. So let's try to run this particular code. I'll just remove some extra spaces, and let's try to run this particular code. It runs well. Let's try to submit and see. Yes, the solution is indeed accepted, and looks like a fairly easy problem. They have labeled it as a medium level problem, but it's really important to understand window functions. So in a lot of the data science interviews, I think you will end up with similar problems where you will use some sort of window function, because these are immensely useful in real life as well when you are pulling in data from data warehouses and all. And these are some of the favorite topics of interviews, because a lot of good problems can be framed using this, and like I mentioned, they are extremely useful in real life as well. So I think we solved this particular problem. All we had to do was understand that window functions will be used in this particular one, and then just break the problem step by step into different CTEs, and then finally merge all the CTEs and then aggregate whatever you have developed above. So it was a fairly simple problem. It's labeled as a medium level problem, but if you were able to think through this, then well and good. You have some of the basics of SQL which are crystal clear to you. But I think that if not, then definitely you would have learned something new and how to think about these problems. More than the solution, the thought process to arrive at the solution is more important, especially if you are preparing for the interviews. A clear communication of your approach also helps and definitely counts well. So hopefully you enjoyed this particular video. If you did, please consider liking this one, and also subscribe to this channel because I plan on uploading more such content. Not only theoretical videos, we have a lot of theoretical videos because those have their own importance, both to understand concepts in depth and also for interviews. And the coding questions and the hands-on is equally important, so you will have more of SQL coding, Python coding, system design. When I say system design, I mean machine learning system design, and more of theoretical videos. So a lot of content coming in, so definitely subscribe to this channel, and I will see you next time. Then until then, keep learning and stay safe. Bye bye.